Oh, this should just... Oh, wow, that's snug. This is video 2 of the Venn Venture, which is basically putting a motorcycle engine onto this four-wheeler. That's the nickname for this project. So right now, it doesn't have any way to mount this cage to the four-wheeler, which is why we need to make the front motor mounts. The engine being from Suzuki and the frame being from Polaris, I don't think they had plans for these two frames to be mounted together, so we're gonna have to do some planning and some design work to make this fit. Okay, so I've been staring at this engine for way too long, and I'll show you what I've discovered so far. So down here is the front diff. We have the front bumper mounts and everything. We have the vertical support bars that I ended up cutting off when I was taking off the top part of the frame. And then up here floating on the chain is the engine and its cage. And I'm more worried about the cage right now, because if we look front on, we can kind of line up and look down the edge here and edge here, which is pretty flat. But we notice that we have the oil pan back there that comes down further down, which is fine because it's further back. But this guy right here, this one screw, and it looks like to be some kind of drain for the actual oil filter right here. There's a plug right there. But it also is below the cage for the engine. And let me show you that. Here is a straight level, and I'm going to put this against there, and if I go up, I'm hitting, and it doesn't quite go up. Go back a little bit further, goes up a little bit more, but if I pass that bump there, it sits flush. So there's a point behind it where this is good, and then obviously we hit the oil pan at a certain point. So we have a little bit of distance in between here that we can get things to work. And that distance is rather quite small. Here, let's look at the side. We have from point here to here. Now if we get the tape measure out, measure this, it's about 2.5 inches, and that'd be on the tight side. So we want to give a little bit more than that. So let's say just 2.25, that gives us a little bit of wiggle room. Funnily enough, this is just under 2.5 inches. So if I lay this sideways under here, you can see it doesn't sit flat here, but right behind it, I got a little bit of wiggle room that this does sit flat, which is great news, because that means I can find a bar that's about the same width as this and mount it up underneath, and we can actually set that down flat onto here. I did measure from the front. I made some markings right there and right there, and that if I cut them there, it'll sit right flat on top of the diff, because when we add that brace bar that goes across this, it'll be able to sit flat and give a little bit of height on top of the diff, which is nice. Now we come to the next dilemma, which is great. We now have, the spot to put the bar across. It'll fit here. It'll fit, without hitting the engine in that one spot up here. The issue is I would like to weld that bar from this tube to this tube over here, but we can't do that because the tube here is detachable from here, here, and there, and you need to be able to take off that segment to get the engine out, in case I ever need to do that for whatever reason that may be. So I can't weld this tube to this tube together. Now I can weld these two beams together, but it makes this diff being able to take it out a lot more difficult. If we look under, we have 2 bolts here and 2 bolts back there, and that will actually get off the front diff, but that needs to be lifted almost straight up, which is another dilemma. So somehow the tube that goes across here has to be removable to get this out, and needs to be detached from these 2 tubes. I mean, it could be solid welded to this tube, but it'll be right in front of this one, and half of this being able to be removed is get out of the way for the engine to be removed. So the bar that goes across needs to be detachable from this frame and this frame, which makes it a chunk bit difficult. I looked on Home Depot, and I found this 2-inch wide C channel. That way, so we get strength downwards if we looped the C shape over this. And I did look at right here, about 1.78 inches, so let's just call that 1 3/4 inches. So if we measure this on the outside, we'll see that this is about 2¼ inches. That's too big. If we measure from the inside area, we're about 1¾ inches. So if we cut off the little tab right here on each side, we'll be able to get that C channel to slot right over perfectly on that. So that checks out. And if we cut a little bit extra and bend one of the edges over and over, we have that little spot right here that we can drill a hole in. Here, let me turn my light back on. There we go. We can drill a hole in right there and just bolt straight through it here. That way so we can have a channel that sits on and bolts on each side. So that is removable. That's good. This tube, I don't necessarily want to drill through it if I don't have to. I'd like to weld something rather to it. You can see up here when they had a bolt that goes through it. What they did is they actually drilled a hole through this tube and then welded in a piece of metal to fill in that hole, and that the screw could actually tighten up against inside. And I don't have any way, realistically, or easily, should I say, that I would be able to remake that. So I'm thinking about welding a sheet of metal or some kind of another plate, kind of like how this has in here, but instead of bolted, it'll be welded on down here. So I like weld on a plate that sticks out to maybe like right here, and then there'd be like a bolt hole that goes through it that bolts onto the C channel here. The downside of that is that here, this is pretty close to, let's call, 8½ inches. And if we measure the frame across, it's just over 12 inches if I remember right. I can't really reach it in a second. And you can see that the tubes of the motorcycle is wider than this. So that kind of throws my idea of bending over the channel a little bit to fit this right. Unless, we did some other things, because we actually need this channel wider. It needs to stick out a little bit more. Because the difference between 12 and 8½ is 3½, and then half of that would be 1¾ inches. Which if we measure from the outside here to over, gives us not that much room to put a bolt there. So that is the current dilemma I've been sitting here pondering about. So we have a place to mount here. We have a place to mount here. We don't necessarily have a way to mount a plate to here and to here. So if that makes sense. Have a place but can't attach it there. Now there is already a plate here that is attaching to that mount. So what I could do is actually run a plate that goes through that bolt hole. We just go over the edge of it. Oh, that is a possibility. What we could do is the plate that goes off here, we have extra. We could bend it up here, goes straight up, and then bolts into that hole as well. And we could do, and there's one hole on each side. Let me actually, it looks like it's about the same spot. Let's actually make sure it lines up with that one cavity that we have. Look at that, that lines right up. Okay, well, now we have a way to mount the plate from here and to the frame. Be it it's going to be bolted and not welded together, but actually that makes my life a lot easier. That just means I have to grind those more flat, grind off some of the tabs in the C channel, make sure it fits there, and it's bolt on. No welding needed. So far this project hasn't required welding. We still have to do this in a few different ways to get the back working, but let's work from there first. Also, just in case anybody's worried, how I'm storing this is I'm making sure that there's wood blocks, so it's not actually sitting in the oil pan, it's sitting on the frame. I just haven't been showing you that. Very little tension on it. It's just keeping it bounced upwards. Right after that almost, I was like, I can make it a little bit looser. And I got it a little bit looser, I did. And the chain popped off of these mounting blocks. And this, since this is tapers backwards, this chain slipped all the way backwards, back down to here. Well, you can imagine it fell towards me, but yeah, I did end up catching it and lifting it back up, getting the chain back on. But I'm gonna have to figure out a different way of keeping this up. Like I said before, most of the weight is on the blocks. I'm gonna figure that out right now.
Reminds me of a story.
It's got a little bit of tension right right here. Most of the weight is on the ATV frame, enough to where I can wiggle the whole thing forward and back, and it stays up there. So a lot safer than I had it a few minutes ago. Sneak peek for a later project, which you guys haven't seen yet. Ooh, fully disassembled carb, fully this time. You're probably thinking, is that the 600 Suzuki carb? Nope. That's the 600 Suzuki carb. So what does that belong to? What does that 2 carb belong to? And there's another carb outside. You'll just have to figure out what all those projects are. There's another carb. There's 5 carbs sitting in here. Well, I guess you'll just have to find out what those go to. So, I went to the hardware store today, and I got 2 things. Some angle iron was the second idea. The first idea was to get the C-channel. There you go, you can see that. But you can see that the wall thickness is it's short. They just don't sell 2 by 1 inch C-channel at Home Depot and stuff. So I got both just so I could fit it on there and see which one was better. So I'm gonna have to weld a bottom tab so it would bolt on. That way so I can secure this to the ATV frame, or I will cut this in half and weld 2 halves of this together, and I'll drill a hole and bolt through this as if I'm just making C-channel again. And I do realize I could get 2-inch square tubing, cut it like right in half. The only thing is, they don't sell that at Lowe's or Home Depot. That's all I really have available to me right here. Glad I put a jacket on. It is cold outside. Actually, let me bring you down with me. You don't have to be way up here. So these are the brackets I have to work with. What I was hoping for is that the outer diameter here should fit perfectly inside of here, which it does actually quite snugly. I'll just cut off the tabs a little bit and it'll slot perfectly onto there. This beam, when it's right in place, so it's too far this way right now, but when it is in place, I should be able to cut 2 notches here, flex it up, and bolt onto this bolt right here, which is part of the cage, and to the engine mount. I want to cut it just to where the bottom of this hole. Right now we have about 1.5 inches until it hits the front diff. So we can remove it by quite a bit. We can lower it. I should check if the concrete is flat first. Let me do that. Concrete is a little bit off, but it's about almost right there. So I'm gonna call that flat. Actually, you know what? If I angle this on the ground, yeah, there we go. I'm not gonna make this mistake again. That's not half bad. A tad low on my line. Oh, I didn't mark this side. God dang it. Yeah, that's not good. I'm a tad high on this side. Let's get a flat disc for this. Now that's flat. That's what you want to see. And that is beautiful. I love that. And I'm going to call that good. Let's cut those back ears off and lay it across there like that. Just a smidge over 3/8. Perfect. Oh, there's no wiggle at all. That's awesome. A little bit side to side, but oh yeah, nothing up and down, no wiggle that way. Since this is bent into a U shape, there's a radius in the side inside this. A little bit of wobble feel this way. I think it's actually rocking around that radius. No rock. Okay, so the radius is no longer hidden. You see that this gap here is more of a horizontal gap than a vertical gap, but we got a little bit of height difference there, right into there perfectly. This one fits in there all nice and smooth. That over a little bit, forward if we can. And it's on it. Oil pan is clearing the diff right there. Don't look like we're having any issues. This can hit full top before it hits the frame. That is probably about the lowest we can get it. I can just set you right here. If I flex this up, I'll have just enough room to put that bolt through this beam. when looking around here, there is an addition in the back. I just tossed the hover around seat on top of here. With the current bar that I didn't cut down yet, it's just sitting on that. The back is actually sitting right down on the transmissions. I have to raise that up a bit, and the front will obviously be lowered a bit, but there's actually enough room straight through there that I can get the transmission linkages through. That way so I don't have to cut off the side piece of material. Since there's this really, really strong bar, there's that really strong beam across there. If somehow I can mount that beam to the cross beams right there, I can use this as structure, and it has nice mounting holes and everything on it, that I can just use this and just continue it forward and mount it somewhere into the frame here. And this is wide enough to we have leg room inside of it. Obviously this is a little bit narrow, so I'll have to move this back a little bit further, which we have room to do. I'm not worried about that. But it gives us nice structure for the outer frame here. So that the two vertical support beams that are there, I was already gonna have to make a bracket from this piece to them. And before I was thinking I was just gonna weld on a piece that went straight down. Actually, it was a slight angle just to match that same angle, and just weld it on with one strip of bead on each side and deal with that. And then I realized, why should I do that when I already have angle iron? So I can just cut a small chunk off of either this one or that one, probably the bigger piece, and just drill a hole right there. Now for right here, a bolt is right under 3 inches, and we have about 3.5 inches of clearance. Oh, there we go, you can see that. So, since this is going to be bent as tight as I can, which we know is going to be a perfect 90 degrees, no questions asked, I'm going to definitely not do 3.5 inches. I'm going to leave myself maybe like 5 inches. So it's actually not that bad. Most of that's just a bit of a grinder mark there and there. What I'll probably end up doing is I'll weld into that square there to make that more of a 45 on each side. But otherwise, that bent quite nicely. Let's get this back into there. Too far. And so I gotta get that Sharpie, mark out how this needs to be cut, because it can't be a flat cut. It actually needs to be like a weird kind of angle, kind of a trapezoid. There it goes. I'm going to mark it a little bit farther to the right, considering I have about an 1/8 inch extra on that, on the right side. On the left side, I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra room. And now I've realized that I took out that bolt and got it in there all so perfectly, and well, now I have to cut the other side, so I have to take it out. So at least I know it fits now. I looked at the time, and well, it's 4:18, not PM. Just a little bit tired, so let's call it a night. I didn't think about that. side fits fine. Let's check how straight we are. Right there. So now the bracket fits the motorcycle frame. It fits the ATV. Bolts onto the motorcycle. Doesn't yet bolt onto the ATV frame yet. This even. That should keep the motor even. Now here's the angled piece. It's going to go inside here. The issue though, as you can see, that is not flat. It's the same angle, or it's 90 degrees from this, which is not straight up and down. I'm gonna have to bend that a little bit more flat. I'm gonna attempt to just squish it. That's no longer 90 degrees. I had an idea to make sure I know that those are in the exact right place. This one is right hand side. Nice and tight. I know now. That goes right there. Let's get the other one out. Just hold it there. Get this relined back up. We have a nice dimple right where we need it. It's bolted on like that. Now I go check if that one's in the right spot. Those should just line up. And they do. Oh wow, that's snug. Now it's time to drill the hole that goes through the side. Oh, that fits so nice. Oh, it just fits. That's part of the frame now. Nice. So I got everything put away. The engine, everything is on jacks. It's all nice and supported. This is up there. I have this just a bit tight just to make sure I'm not putting too much weight on there right now. But otherwise, that's pretty good. I do have to do some extra mounts for the rear since the fronts are just basically a pivot point almost. But yeah, that's working out pretty good. But yeah, front mounts are all good. Next point is to either remove this segment yet or to do the rear motor mounts. And I think the rear motor mounts are probably the best idea, but taking off the rhino nose horn part would be a lot more fun. But that'll be next weekend. Thank you for watching through to here, and I hope to see you in the next video.